What's up, everybody? It's Roman Gennaro. This is Empire Sports Talk, my mom's favorite podcast, and we are back for a brand new episode. So let's get started. First things first, we want to start with Major League Baseball as the surprisingly hot start for the Pittsburgh Pirates continues. The New York Yankees and Los Angeles Dodgers were the first teams to reach the 10-win mark, but Pittsburgh was right behind them as they notched their 10th win on Friday night against the Philadelphia Phillies. So with our week two power rankings coming out tomorrow as we record this on Saturday, coming out on Sunday night, look for the Dodgers, Yankees, and Pirates to remain near the top. First thing we want to touch on in baseball is the highly anticipated debut of Jackson Holliday, who debuted on Wednesday night against the Boston Red Sox. It's been a bit of a rough start for Jackson Holliday in the majors. He has gone 0 for 11 with 7 strikeouts, but he has notched an RBI and 2 runs scored. This might be it. Look, I'm not it's way too soon for anybody to say anything like bust, but what I will say is it kind of reminds me of because I know the Orioles felt a lot of pressure to bring him up because many people thought that he should have been on the opening day roster coming out of spring training because he hit like 400 or something in spring training, something ridiculous. And so there was a lot of pressure on the Orioles to bring him up out of spring training, and they sent him down to AAA for the first couple of, for the first week or so, and he continued to hit. So they're like, now it's time to bring him up. But he's struggled in his first series in the major leagues, and I think this is a situation where I think they rushed him. I think they felt a lot of pressure. Like I said, he is just 18 years old. He's very, very, very young, and the Orioles they don't need him right now. Well, they're still they won 100 games last year. Colton Cowser is on an absolute heater offensively. He had just the series of his life against Boston. That team won 100 games without him. Like, sure, when they get him and when he gets used to it, he's obviously going to be an asset, but they don't need him right now. And it reminds me of when the Braves rushed Dansby Swanson from Double A to the majors because they thought they had to at the end of, I think it was 2016. And he struggled. He really, really struggled jumping from Double A to the majors. And I know that's not the case with Jackson Holliday, but that was the case of the Braves felt like they had to rush him. The Braves rushed him, and I feel like the Orioles felt like they needed to bring up Jackson Holliday because of all the noise they were hearing about needing to bring up Jackson Holliday. And in the Braves case, they sent Dansby Swanson back down to AAA to get more swings in, get it going. And when he came back up, he never went back down. So I think this is a case of I think Jackson Holliday needs to. I'm not saying he's not ready, but the fact that he started 0 for 11 with 7 strikeouts means that maybe he came out on on his debut night, struck out twice, went 0 for 4, and maybe it got in his head. I think that's easy to do when you've been this good your entire life. You're the number one overall pick. You're 18 years old, making your major league debut, and you strike out twice. It's easy at a place like Fenway Park. It's easy to let it get in your head. I'm not saying Jackson Holliday's not ready for Major League Baseball. What I am saying is send him back to AAA, let him get his head right, let him find his swing again, let him get back on track, and bring him back. Bring him back up and see if that helps. Because I do think Jackson Holliday is going to be really good at the major league level, but it's been a bit of a rough start, and I think he could benefit from taking a few swings back in AAA after starting 0 for 11 with 7 strikeouts. The big story continues to be in Major League Baseball continues to be Shohei Ohtani and his former interpreter Ippei Mizuhara, who just recently turned himself in to authorities and was set free on $25,000 bond, but it was a certain kind of bond. The type of the name is slipping my mind, but it's the kind of bond in that he didn't have to pay it to get out. But if he neglects to show up at his next appearance, then he has to pay the 25,000. When we first started getting details on the story, we had heard, that it was in the neighborhood of 2 million, 5 million that he had taken from Otani. We now know that he took over 16 million from Shohei and at times impersonated Shohei Ohtani. So maybe that's why, and I'm speculating, maybe that's why Shohei's signature showed up on some stuff. This could be because clearly Ippei was impersonating Shohei Ohtani. And Shohei himself said that he's glad the investigation is over because he wants to focus on baseball. That to me sounds like somebody that is a victim in all this. But as far as Matsuhara, he is being charged with one count of bank fraud, which can carry a maximum fine of up to 1 million and or 30 years in prison, and he is scheduled to be arraigned on May 9th. So the matter is not resolved. But we will have to wait until May 9th to hear more about the further penalties that Ippei Matsuhara will have to face for his role in the Shohei Ohtani saga. Or not even his role, just being the saga, pretty much. But now to back to what's going on the field. Bad news for one of the other teams that is going to be near the top of my power rankings again this week, and one of the National League favorites to get to the World Series, Spencer Strider, who was picked by many to be the favorite for the National League Cy Young Award, is out for the rest of the season after undergoing surgery to repair his UCL. He is done for the year. That is a huge blow to that Atlanta rotation, as he was the number one guy, and he's out after making just two starts. He joins a growing list of pitchers who have sustained significant injuries at this early part of the season. Um, one, the most notable being Shane Bieber, who is also out for the season, and Garrett Cole, who is out for 10 to 12 weeks. But based on recent reports that he's already doing pretty well, it's going to be on the shorter side, most likely. Um, Many people were quick to blame the pitch clock for these increased injuries, and maybe it is. There have been some pitchers that there have been some major league pitchers that have said, "Hey, this is the reason." And I think that argument held more weight last year, uh, as it was new. But pitchers and hitters alike have had over a year now to get used to the flow of having a pitch clock. So I don't know if that's as relevant of an excuse. A- Am I a big fan of the pitch clock? Not really, but I don't think that's the reason. Um, Ben Verlander on his Flippin' Bats podcast brought up a more realistic option, which is if you look at guys like Spencer Strider and just the way that Major League Baseball has gone in the past several years, there is a premium on throwing the ball as hard as you can, as often as you can. If you look at, Spencer Strider, almost all of his fastballs are 99 or 100 miles an hour. And the human body is not made, is not naturally supposed to throw something that hard. It's not good for you. There are pitching coaches who tell pitchers like don't throw a slider because that does significantly more damage to your arm. And but throwing 100 miles an hour will do it too. And Spencer Strider has good enough command of his pitches where he doesn't have to throw 100 miles an hour. And Ben Verlander even said this, like when he comes back from his surgery, like take it down a few notches. Get down there at 95 and just use your curveball, use your other pitches more. Because when you look at longevity of a pitcher, Obviously, we love the 100-mile-an-hour fastball, and those are the guys that get the headlines. Those are the guys that get the number one spots in the rotation. The 100-mile-an-hour fastball sells tickets. But when you look at the guys who had long, long pitching careers and stayed healthy for the majority of those years, you have R.A. Dickey, Bartolo Colon, Anibal Sanchez comes to mind. Um, and these were guys who maybe they weren't the flashiest, maybe they weren't the biggest names. Jamie Moyer pitched until he was almost 50. Um, but they were effective because they didn't need to throw 100 miles an hour. They threw 92, 93 and located and used command. And they were able to be around. And in R.A. Dickey's case, he threw the knuckleball and he even won a Cy Young. So you don't have to throw 100 miles an hour to be the best pitcher in baseball. And pitchers like this have proven it. Like I said, Bartolo Colon, it was rough towards the end because he was over 40. And Anibal Sanchez never been super flashy, but Anibal Sanchez was a solid pitcher for a long time because throughout the course of his career he reinvented himself based on what his body needed. And I hope that that's what Spencer Strider does when he comes back because like his body told him like, hey, maybe you shouldn't throw 50% of your pitches at 99 miles an hour. Maybe that's not the best idea. And so maybe whether or not people want to blame the pitch clock, maybe this uptick in injuries will force teams and pitching coaches to look at it and say, maybe it's time that baseball change again. Maybe it's time we get back to preaching command and focusing on aiming our pitches where they need to go instead of throwing them as hard as we can. And honestly, that was my worry when I heard that Jordan Hicks was going to when the Giants were going to turn him into a starting pitcher because Jordan Hicks was somebody who we'd known as throwing 102 miles an hour and not having very much command. But from all accounts, that's going great. He's 2-0. He's got an ERA of 1, 13 strikeouts, and a whip of 0.83 in 13 innings. So things are going really, really well. But that's obviously because there were articles in the offseason that said he's made adjustments, he's added pitches, he's toned it down, he's gotten his walks under control. He's only walked 3 batters in 13 innings, which is not something the that Jordan Hicks would have done earlier in his career. So adjustments have been made. And we look at guys like him early in his career. We look at guys like Sean Newcomb with the Braves and now the Red Sox or wherever he is now. These were guys who velocity was preached over command, and things didn't go as well for them. And now in Jordan Hicks's case, he's adjusted. And I'd like to see the league as a whole adjust and say command is more important because it doesn't matter how hard you can throw if you don't throw strikes, or in this case, it doesn't matter how hard you can throw if throwing hard is what gets you hurt. And I think that's what the case is here. I agree with Ben Verlander. I don't think this is because of the pitch clock. Might it have something to do with it? Maybe, but we have no way of knowing that uh, because there's nothing that can tell us, oh, this is because he threw, you know, 5 more pitches in a span of 20 minutes. There's no way to know that. But I think it's more likely a symptom of a league that is preaching doing something that is wildly unnatural for the human body as many times as possible. Like we're looking at high schoolers and saying you should be able to throw 95. It's a 17, 18-year-old body that's still growing and say you should throw 95. That's not, and I think back to when I was in high school. We had several good pitchers for our high school baseball team, but the guy that caused hitters the most trouble The guy that had the most success, got the filthiest swing and misses, was not the guy that threw 88, 89, because we had a couple of those guys. We had several guys that played college baseball. It was the guy that threw 75 and had a nasty curveball. That was the guy that our quote unquote fifth starter in high school was the guy who had good command, the filthy off speed stuff, and didn't throw very hard. That's the guy that's going to be around a while. That's the guy that's going to pitch 200, 230 innings in the major leagues because he's not going to blow out his arm throwing 100 miles an hour. All that to say, wish Spencer Strider a speedy recovery, and I'd like to see this uptick in pitcher injuries result in a change in Major League Baseball that puts a focus more on command instead of velocity. Command and break instead of velocity. With this injury, it means that Max Fried is going to have to step up. Max Fried is no stranger to being the ace of the Braves staff. He did it before Spencer Strider got there. But things did not start super well for Max Fried this season. He didn't make it out of the first inning of his first start. He went two-thirds of an inning and gave up six in his first start. His second start wasn't much better. He gave up, I think, three in the first inning, and it looked like he was going to get pulled again. And he muscled it out into, I think he made it through five. But he did have a good start last night as we record this against the Miami Marlins. He went six and a third innings, only gave up one earned run to lower his season ERA to 8.74. So last night was hopefully the trend of things to come, but it was his first good start of the season. He's going to need to step up in a contract year. There were big expectations from fans and from media for Max Fried this year because it was a walk year, because it was a contract year. And now he's going to have to prove that he can be the guy. Chris Sale and Charlie Morton have pitched very well in that rotation as well. Um, but with Charlie's advanced age and Chris Sale's injury history, I wouldn't want the Braves to put too much weight on their backs. What they can give us is great, but it's on Max now to step up and do it, especially because Braves prospect Alan Winans got shelled against the Mets in place of Spencer Strider. But the Braves are going to have to rely on their farm system guys. They're probably going to have to bring up guys like Bryce Elder, who did a great job for them last year. I was kind of surprised he didn't make the rotation coming into this year. Reynaldo Lopez is going to have to build off of his great start in the rotation. And they're probably going to have to bring up AJ Smith-Shawver, who was also a favorite. AJ Smith-Shawver and Bryce Elder were competing with Reynaldo Lopez for that fifth spot coming out of camp. And early in camp, people thought that it should go to Shawver, but things kind of tailed for him. I think he dealt with a bit of a minor injury at the end of camp, and then he got roughed up in the minors a couple nights ago. He's had a bit of a rough start, but I do think the Braves will have to rely on him as well as Bryce Elder at some point to make up for the innings they lose from losing Spencer Strider. Um, but I still think the Braves offense is arguably the best in baseball. I still think this is one of the best teams in the league. It's going to be hard to get over the loss of Strider, but if there is a team that can do it, if there is a team that can get over the loss of their ace and not miss a beat outside of the New York Yankees, who seem to be doing pretty well, it is the Atlanta Braves. But with that, as I said, keep in mind, keep an eye out for our power rankings as they come out tomorrow, Sunday evening, week two, to see how the last week of games affects the rankings. Stay tuned for that on our Empire Sports Talk social media channels. Now I want to shift to the NFL. The NFL draft is less than 2 weeks away now. The presumptive first overall pick, and I think it's all but a done deal. He's met with the team several times, is going to be Caleb Williams. And I think it's very exciting the turnaround that we've seen from the Chicago Bears. I think it has a lot to do with what we've seen from the Houston Texans, who, as just a little side note, got Stephon Diggs from the Buffalo Bills to pair with Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and the rest of that pretty incredible Houston Texans offense led by CJ Stroud. And I think Chicago is finally taking a page out of Houston's playbook because just a couple of weeks ago, just a couple of months ago, we were talking about why would Caleb Williams want to go there? That organization will destroy him. They have nothing. They need way more than Caleb Williams, which is why they should keep Justin Fields and build around him. And I'm out of breath there because I was one of the ones that talked till I was blue in the face and said you need more than Caleb Williams. You need more than Caleb Williams. That team needs help. And they heard all the noise and they watched what Houston did, went going from the worst team in football to a playoff contender in 1 year because they had the right coach, because they had the right quarterback, because they built a team. That what the Houston Texans were able to do is, and yes, I say this while wearing the jersey of AFC South rival Peyton Manning. What they were able to do in 1 year is miraculous. Do I think the Bears are going to be able to do that? No. But they heard. They listened. They went out and traded for Keenan Allen to pair with DJ Moore. They went out and got DeAndre Swift to put in the backfield because the Bears have not had a workhorse in the backfield for more than 1 year, really since Thomas Jones. I'm sorry, not since Matt Forte. I'm sorry. I'm stuck in 2006 because I'm wearing the Peyton Manning jersey. They haven't had a workhorse back for more than 1 year since Matt Forte. They've had some good guys back there for a year at a time. They had Ty Montgomery for a minute. They had Jordan Howard, who had one or two really great years and then faded. They had Khalil Herbert, and they still do, and I think he'll be a good backup to DeAndre Swift. But DeAndre Swift is the first time since Matt Forte, and Matt Forte was the first time since Thomas Jones that they've had somebody who's going to take the snaps and be reliable and hopefully be there for more than 1 year. And so the Bears have quickly built an offense around presumably Caleb Williams. And so now they're in a situation where if they come up to the draft outside of Caleb Williams in the first pick, they also have the ninth pick. So if they come up to the draft and they focus on offensive line, pass rushers, secondary, like I think this is something because what wasn't talked about last year because everything was focused on Justin Fields and the coaching situation. And unlike D'Amico Ryans in Houston, I don't think Matt Eberflus is the right coach there. I don't think it's the coach where I'm like, yeah, that's the right fit. I don't. I think somebody like Mike Vrabel or offensively speaking, Sean McVay, if he decides to leave the Rams a year from now, would be better than Matt Eberflus. Like I feel like the right coach is out there. He's not it. I don't know who the right coach is until I see it, but these are just some options. But if they but what wasn't talked about is that the defense was actually pretty decent for the Bears. The defense was getting the job done. The defense was doing what the offense couldn't do, and that's why up until the last couple weeks of the season, there was a way where the Bears could have messed around and made the playoffs if they could have gotten out of their own way offensively. They couldn't do it. That's why the Bears weren't out of it in week 6 because their defense was keeping them in games that they had no business being in. And so I looked at some of the stats in it and they weren't the best defense in football. That was the Baltimore Ravens. But you look at their rankings and you're like, well, yeah, they were in the top half of the league in most categories. They were pretty good. uh, Defensively. They were 12th in total yards allowed, 11th in turnovers. They were second. They were first against the run in terms of like yards per game, yards on the ground. They were the best rush defense in the NFL. And they had the fourth fewest yards per completion, the second fewest touchdowns allowed, and they were top five in not allowing plays 20 yards or more. They were tied for first in plays of 40 yards or more because they didn't have one. The longest play of the season against their defense was 36 yards. They were fifth in yards in plays of 20 yards or more. They didn't allow the big play. They didn't allow the gash play. Um, so the defense was doing all right. Their one big weakness was that they were second to last in sacks. So it's a pretty good, it's a pretty deep draft in a lot of areas, and it's a pretty good draft for pass rushers. I know there's a really good pass rusher out. His name escapes me. It's his first name's Peyton. I can't remember his last name, but he's out of NC State. There's a really good pass rusher there. There's several good pass rushers. You go with the ninth pick. You get a pass rusher. You get some defense. You get some offensive line help to protect Caleb Williams. You go get the best left tackle in the draft. And I think the Bears, look, the NFC North is going to be a tough division. A tough division. So I'm not gonna say they're gonna make the playoffs this year. I don't think that's gonna happen. But they're in a heck of a lot better situation than they were 2 months ago when we were like, why would Caleb Williams want to go there? Why would he go there? He'll get his butt kicked like Bryce Young is in Carolina. I don't like hearing the Bryce Young bust talk because look at what he has to work with, or more importantly, what he doesn't have to work with. I don't think it's a Bryce Young issue. I think it's a Carolina Panthers issue. And that was pretty much what Caleb Williams was walking into 2, 3 months ago. And now it's a situation where it's like, okay, that offense is actually looking pretty good. The defense has been pretty good. So let's just protect him. Let's get some pass rushers and see what we got. Because, like I said, it's going to be tough. The Packers surprised a lot of people last year, beating up on Dallas in the playoffs. Jordan Love, I think, had 21 touchdowns and one interception in the last 6 weeks of the season. The Lions are who the Lions are. They won 13 games a year ago. They won their first playoff game in 30 years. I don't think that's going to change. Dan Campbell's not going anywhere. Jared Goff's not going anywhere. I've said on this podcast many times, I love Dan Campbell. I love what they're doing in Detroit. I don't think they're going anywhere. The team, I think all the pressure in the NFC North is on the Minnesota Vikings. I think they're still a good team, but they're a good team without a quarterback. They have Hawkinson, they have Jefferson, they have Jordan Addison. I think the Minnesota Vikings have one of the best receiving corps in football. They don't have a quarterback right now. So the pressure is on them to go get a quarterback. And as it stands, they have the 11th pick in the draft. But the rumor is that they are looking to trade up in the draft and take a quarterback. The quarterback that they have been mostly tied to is J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy's former coach is now with the San Diego Chargers. The San Diego Chargers have the fifth pick and they don't need a quarterback. So the popular opinion is that the Minnesota Vikings will move up to fifth in a trade with J.J. McCarthy's former college coach, Jim Harbaugh, and the San Diego Chargers, and take J.J. McCarthy at five. I like that pick. I like J.J. McCarthy. I'm not as down on him in the NFL as some are, but I'm not as high on him either. I've heard comparisons to Joe Burrow. I don't think that's going to be the truth at all, but I also don't think he's going to be a bust. I think he's going to be a solid NFL quarterback. And they're like, well, he didn't get asked to throw the ball a lot at Michigan because of Blake Corum. Well, he now has Aaron Jones behind him, so he'll still have a good running back. And I think if you have the receivers that Minnesota has, if you have Justin Jefferson, one of the best receivers in football, if you have Jordan Addison, maybe the best second-year receiver in the NFL. You don't mind having to throw the ball. It's not that he couldn't throw the ball. It's just that wasn't their game plan because Jim Harbaugh is a run the ball kind of guy. It's not that he couldn't. He showed that he could when he had to. So I like the idea of JJ McCarthy to the Vikings and trading with the Chargers for the fifth pick makes a lot of sense. Like I said, I think the pressure in the division is on Minnesota to kind of stay at the same level that they were with Kirk Cousins, who's now in Atlanta. With the improvements to Chicago, I think if Minnesota doesn't make the right pick at quarterback, they could easily find themselves in last place in a very, very tough division. So I think it's quite miraculous the moves, the turnaround that Chicago has made in just a couple of months after seemingly taking a page out of the Houston Texans playbook, who turned a terrible franchise into a pretty dang good team in 1 year. I think Chicago's going to need a little bit more time because they didn't quite have the dysfunction in Chicago runs a lot deeper than the dysfunction in Houston because Houston had been good more recently than Chicago had and has been around a lot less time than Chicago has, and Chicago has had their share of issues since they were in the Super Bowl in 2006. So I don't think it's going to be a 1 year turnaround for Chicago. I think they are several moves away, but they're off to a dang good start. I'll be keeping a close eye on what they do in the draft. I think it needs to be the best left tackle in the draft, and then all pass rushers because the Bears did. I think they were like second in defensive scoring. I think they had a couple of interception returns for touchdowns in the season. I think they had a few fumbles. So like they have a good secondary. So I think if they just get pass rushers, the shore up their weakest point on defense, they were second to last in sacks. They if they can address that and they get the best left tackle money can buy for Caleb Williams, I think they're off to a really good start. I have heard links between Brock Bowers and the Georgia tight end and the Bears. I like that too. But they do have Cole Kmet. I think he's a really good tight end. So they don't need Brock Bowers, but I think it's fun to think about. I'm on this podcast pitching for Brock Bowers to Indy, but that's just me. But I think the Bears had a really good start to this rebuild that was a long time coming and something they just seemingly wouldn't do around Justin Fields. And everybody's like, "Well, Justin Fields isn't that good." Look what he had. Look what he had before 2 months ago. Look what Justin Fields had to work with outside of DJ Moore. Nothing. And now he's in Pittsburgh and they don't have super good offensive weapons, but he does have the consistency of Mike Tomlin. He does have the ability to sit behind Russell Wilson and learn. He does have a pretty good defense. So I'm rooting for the revitalization of Justin Fields' career because I think he was unfairly judged in Chicago because it was Chicago. But now Chicago seems to finally be on the right track. I don't think they have their Dan Campbell. I don't think they have their D'Amico Ryans. That perfect fit. I don't think they have that Mike McDaniel in Matt Eberflus. I don't think they have that. I'm not sure who it is. Maybe it's Ben Johnson a year from now. Maybe it's Mike Vrabel a year from now. Maybe it's Sean McVay a year from now because he wants to work with Caleb Williams. I don't know. But I don't think they have their guy yet, and I think that might affect some of it. Last thing I want to touch on, we are days away from the NBA playoffs kicking off with the play-in tournament. There are still a couple of slots to be decided. In the East, the Miami Heat, Philadelphia 76ers, Orlando Magic, and Indiana Pacers are four teams in the East that, with their position yet to be decided, as it currently stands, the Magic and Pacers are outside the play-in with the Sixers and Heat in the play-in, but there is one game to go for each of these teams. So and we are yet to see because the four of them are separated by one game. The Sixers, Magic, and Pacers all have the same record at 46 and 35. The Heat is 45 and 36, so likely they will be in the play-in, although it's not decided yet. And in the West, the only spot up for grabs is the 6 and 7, one in the play-in, one not, and that is between the New Orleans Pelicans and the Phoenix Suns with one game to go. So the NBA playoffs are pretty much ready to go. The Boston Celtics have clinched the one seed with the best record in the NBA at 63-18 currently, and there is a tie atop the West for the number one seed with one game to go between the Oklahoma City Thunder, Minnesota Timberwolves, and Denver Nuggets at 56 and 25. But mainly what I want to talk about in regards to the NBA playoffs and gearing up for that, the Lakers and Warriors are both locked into the play-in. But the main thing I want to talk about in regards to NBA is something that I think will go down as in a few years from now as the worst move in NBA history that nobody talks about. I think a few years from now, more than a few, maybe 10 or 20, people will forget about this because ultimately they made the playoffs, they got the 2 seed, whatever. People are going to forget about this in years time. But I think it's one of the worst moves we've seen in the NBA in a long time. And that is, and I mentioned it when it happened, and I still think it's the wrong move, and the numbers have backed me up here. The Milwaukee Bucks firing Adrian Griffin 43 games into the season. They were 30-13. I think they were tied for first in the West first in the East at the time. Since then, and you look at their record at this point in the season at 49-32, second in the East, and you're like, hey, that's pretty good. Um, but they're 14 games behind the Celtics in the win column, so there's that. But you look at that record and you're like, hey, 49-32 is pretty good. It's really good. Second in the East. But then you remember that the Bucks were 30-13 under Adrian Griffin, who was in his first year. 30-13 under Adrian Griffin, the time that they decided to fire him and move on to somebody that they thought would be an improvement, Doc Rivers, who, in fairness, has a resume. He has a championship. He has a pedigree of success. But since they brought in Doc Rivers, they've gone 19-19. If they lose their final game, they will be under 500 with Doc Rivers. A move they made to improve their team, who was among the worst teams in the NBA defensively at the time, will have finished under 500 with Doc Rivers. So, yes, their 49-32 record is pretty good as a whole. But if you split it into the two coaches, their season with Adrian Griffin was markedly better. And Doc Rivers has the pedigree, but he also has a history of losing in the playoffs. And without Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is going to miss the final game of the season, and his status for the playoffs, for the start of the playoffs, are in doubt because of a calf injury. And even though they have to get through the play-in before their first round matchup, who at this point is unknown because of the 4 teams that are in flux in the space and the way the play-in works out. Still not a fan of the play-in, but it is what it is. It seems like it's here to stay. Their first round matchup is in flux, but if Giannis can't make it back for that matchup and they have to play without Giannis, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an early exit. Look, they if the Magic somehow end up dropping into the play-in and playing the Bucks in the first round as the 7 seed, they're currently the 5. But as I said, they have the same record as the Sixers, who are currently the 7. If they end up dropping to the 7, the Bucks beat them in their last game, and that is their regular season finale is the Magic without Giannis. They did beat the Magic once. They have to play them one more time. If they end up playing the Pacers have a lot of size with Miles Turner and Pascal Siakam, and they're not they're still not that good defensively, which could be trouble with the way Tyrese Halliburton has played this season. If they end up playing the Sixers, who's going to deal with Joel Embiid? how is their subpar defense going to handle Tyrese Maxey? Like, even though it would be a 2-7 matchup, as it were, in the first round, I don't I don't love their matchups with the teams that are not locked in that could possibly end up facing them. Maybe Orlando, but Orlando has been a surprise team this year, and Mike could show up if Giannis doesn't. We'll see how they play Milwaukee to end the regular season, and we'll see how everything shakes out there. Currently, Orlando matches up with Cleveland, who's locked into the 4 seed. But we'll see what happens with the seeding. But I wouldn't be surprised if Milwaukee exited early. And if they exit early and finish with a 500 record with somebody you brought in to win them a championship, the Milwaukee has not made they've had a series of bad decisions in recent years. They Mike Budenholzer wins them a championship. 2 years later, he's gone. They hire Adrian Griffin, first year head coach, gets him to a 30-13 record. He's gone. They bring in Doc Rivers, who yes has a pedigree, yes has a championship, but also has a long list of early playoff exits. He's 19-19. So the last several years for the Bucks, as far as managerial decisions, has been poor, and it reminds me a lot of Mark Jackson when he was the coach of the Warriors at the time when they drafted, Steph and Clay. Right before the Warriors took off, Mark Jackson was there. And you started to see the start of what ended up being the dynasty that Steve Kerr gets all the credit for. And Steve Kerr deserves credit for the Warriors. But what seems to be forgotten, what seems to be almost erased from history, is the fact that it was Mark Jackson who brought in Steph Curry. And it was Mark Jackson who took the Warriors when they still had Monta Ellis with Steph Curry in, I think it was Steph Curry's rookie year, to the playoffs and beat a 1 seed. And it was Mark Jackson that gave us the first glimpses of what we came to know. And he was unceremoniously let go in favor of Steve Kerr. Now, obviously, that ended up being the right choice. But Mark Jackson still hasn't had another head coaching job in the NBA. And many people, including myself, have expressed surprise that he still hasn't really even had that many interviews to be a head coach. Now, apparently, there were things that were said during his time as the coach that maybe weren't the best. Maybe he shouldn't have said, I'm not going to get into that. But Mark Jackson was a really good coach. He was a playoff caliber coach. He laid the groundwork for what became the dynasty and gets none of the credit. And so there's a lot more to unpack with the Mark Jackson situation, but what I'm saying is I'm reminded of that with the Bucks and Adrian Griffin. I'm also reminded of the fact that Dwayne Casey won Coach of the Year. What was it? 2019? No, 2018. Was it 2018? He won Coach of the Year and then was fired by the Raptors in favor of Nick Nurse, who won him a championship. Wins Coach of the Year 2018, is fired after that season. They bring in Nick Nurse, win a championship with Kawhi Leonard. It's wildly unfair for Dwayne Casey. He rebounded a little bit better than Mark Jackson. He spent 2018 from 2019 to 2023 as the Pistons coach, and obviously the Pistons are one of the worst teams in the NBA, but at least he was a coach again, and I think he will coach again. But that was another instance where somebody laid the groundwork for something to happen, and somebody else got credit. But I think almost all the credit for that Toronto championship goes to Kawhi Leonard, who had his career year with Toronto, and I would have loved to see him stay in Toronto. I've said it many, many times on this podcast. But the NBA in particular has a long history of teams like firing coaches when they're doing good in favor of thinking they can do better. Sometimes it works out, and so far in Milwaukee, what we've seen, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's a really interesting case study to look at the Bucks this season and see 30 and 13 under Adrian Griffin, 19 and 19 with one game to go under Doc Rivers, and possibly some pretty unfavorable potential matchups in the first round of the playoffs for the Bucks, especially if they don't have Giannis, which they might not for the start of the thing, because he has a calf strain, and those are usually 1 to 2 week injuries, and if it's 2 weeks, that could extend deep into the first round matchup against whoever it is. I think the only team that they match up favorably against without Giannis, based on what we saw the other night, is Orlando. But Orlando is currently sitting in the 5 seed. So if they beat Milwaukee in the regular season finale, they're in the 5 seed. If they lose to Milwaukee and fall to the 7, we'll see how the play-in works out. But I think the only team of the four that I mentioned that could possibly end up playing Milwaukee in the first round, the only one they match up good against, especially without Giannis, is Orlando. Not to mention Miami, because Miami's locked in to, I think, the 8 spot. Miami's locked in to where they are. Miami and Atlanta are sorry, Chicago and Atlanta are locked in to the play-in. I think Milwaukee be able to handle them, but I didn't even mention Miami um, as a potential as a playoff problem, and I think they would be because playoff Jimmy is a thing. Call it what you will. Playoff Jimmy, the last couple of years, that's a thing. And I do think without Giannis, I think Bam Adebayo is going to be a problem. But Bobby Portis has played pretty well in the couple of games without Giannis, so we don't know. All we can do is wait and see. One game left in the regular season to decide where everybody sits at the bottom of the East, but only time will tell. That's all I have for you on this episode of Empire Sports Talk. I am your host, Roman Gennaro. It's a good day to go 1-0. I'll see you next time.